Just in relation to the shadow, there's also the golden shadow.
Right. Good one, John. Come in with the positives when I've gone too far over to the negative side.
I think the golden shadow. Well, welcome everyone. Um, yeah, I just want to welcome Roland and myself into this space. It's a real privilege to be two wild psychotherapists who are thinking outside the box sometimes and maybe even practicing outside the box and trying to be creative and alive to ourselves and also to our clients, but also alive to the bigger issues in the world, which there are many. So today we're going to just pass back and forth some of our ideas about why America has voted in Trump. Why has that happened? How has that happened? And just try to get to the softer underbelly of maybe what's going on there and see where we get to. We're not in any way ahead of ourselves here. This is going to be spontaneous, coming from our own heart and minds, and we're rolling.
Why don't you go first? Because I've thought about this a lot, and so I'll probably get into a whole spiel and my ideas, and they're kind of very well formulated. And I think yours could be fresh and new and different from mine.
You saying I haven't thought about this a lot, Roland?
Good one, John.
I've thought about this a lot too, but I also take up the challenge to see what arises spontaneously
Okay,
from
go for it.
that well of preoccupation and wonder. So yeah, well I'm disappointed, but not surprised. I'm I'm not surprised because I think when I think about the history of America and the fact that America has a very big shadow, there have been so many cruelties and new developments, but also exploitations and woundings that have gone on in America. And the land also has a kind of newness, aliveness to it. And people have had to almost like go in there as primitive people who were struggling to survive, even. And many people didn't survive, and try to form some kind of cohesive sense of community, which has still not happened, really, not properly. So I think some of it's about how America is still such a work in progress. Not that in every other country isn't. Say, just in terms of how many people have been at a survival level of functioning to do with day-to-day life, and also in some ways there have been lots of hierarchies all around them. Slavery's been there. There's a lot of domestic violence, a lot of gun violence, a lot of lawlessness. If it wasn't for the level of policing, it would even be in worse shape than it is. And in some ways, I think America has externalized a lot of its problems by focusing on the world, trying to be controlling and domineering and empire building in relation to the wider world. So I think in doing so, they've kind of taken pseudo principles that they have got behind in a big magical thinking kind of way, like they're doing good for the world. But it's not, it's in some ways very Trump-like, the way that America has operated historically. He's been on the other side of thinking that he knows, well, he still does. He thinks he knows best. But that mentality has been a part of the empire building. And he's sort of embracing that again, saying we will make America great again. And in a way that is as if it's not already great in so many ways, but full of great big problems as well that aren't being addressed. I think Trump getting in, it may even be a good thing in terms
I
of,
know this is an interesting take, isn't it?
yeah, it may even be a good thing because there are so much of America still needs to mature and develop through participation. And the fact that so many people have voted for this, they've kind of stepped over the line to participate in growth, even vicariously through witnessing what's going to happen. And they did this last time too, that in some ways, the villain became the sheriff of
Hmm.
the town. And then he got held to account by a bigger field of accountability. And everybody said, "Oh, it's okay. It's just Trump." Da 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 da. And they minimized it. And so he's come back for another run at it all, with their kind of championing. With all
Hmm.
of those people, probably 60-70% of America is at that level of maturation, which is which is not very high or rational in terms of global thinking, proper empathy, and proper sophisticated considering of, where the economic system's at, where the world climate issues at, where the whole gun violence issue is riding. So there's a lot, that needs
Hmm.
to be developed. And I think only through participation and leadership that it represents them at the level they function at will America sort of emerge. And Trump, I hope, is going to grow up a lot too. I think he might mature within
You
role.
are such an optimist, aren't you, John?
I think that makes perfectly good sense. And I can look at him and I can say, I really hope you mature and grow up, and that there are a lot of people around you who will invigorate that by holding, parental control of baby while he's in post.
I really hope you're right.
Well, I think in some ways it could be really good for America to mature, grow, and develop.
Okay, are you done?
Yeah, that's good enough for now. Thank
That's
you.
good enough for mine. Okay. I think let's start with the historical perspective. I don't want to just diss everything about America because I live here and I love a lot of it. I mean, it's a physically, it's a wonderful country. And Americans have a certain energetic quality which I found very missing in England, for instance. A kind of enterprising quality, a sense of openness to new ideas, and certainly an energy to kind of get things moving. So when I'm actually in America, I do feel very energized. I feel more creative. And it's not just in the land, it's also in the culture. So there's that thing, but it's a very adolescent kind of energy. And I often think just kind of what you were saying, which is that America is so young. It's 200 plus years old. And I think of Ireland, which has maybe 5,000 years of history, which is fairly continuous and very difficult. But there's still a sense in which there's all this historical background. It kind of gives you a support underneath it. And there's assumptions about the way people need to behave towards each other, which have grown up over hundreds and thousands of years. They don't always work, but they do hold people more. In America, it's like, I don't know, a 15-year-old just not really knowing who they are, what they're about, very distractible, very, very emotionally volatile. So I always think of it as a very adolescent culture. And then I think, in a few hundred years, America will be great again. If you want to put it, that's where you're looking for the greatness. A few hundred years, maybe even more than that. It's going to grow. And then being here for the last, 30 something years, I've seen the swing, Democrat, Republican. You can see it in the presidency. We're going to get Trump. He's going to go far right, and then you'll get a swing to the other side. And then after Trump, we had the Democrats, and it's kind of swings back and forth, which is very much a kind of volatile instability of the adolescent who kind of doesn't know where they are, but oh, that looks great. Oh no, that looks great, kind of like distractible. So I see that. So thinking about Trump and thinking about it in terms of the historical kind of movement, it will swing back the other way. We know that. The question is how much damage will he do in the meantime? The difficulty I find with Trump is that he's a pathological narcissist. I mean, he's got some psychiatric problems. He's probably sociopathic. So those kind of people don't change very easily because they don't let information in. they have a pretty tight boundary because there's actually underneath it all, there's a lot of insecurity, but there's a tight boundary around them. So just as we've seen with Trump, anything that opposes the way he sees the world, he can't let it in. It activates some sort of discomfort, insecurity in himself. And so he's likely not to change. So I'd love him to change. We know with narcissists and people basically with personality disorders, the only reason they change is massive crisis. Illness can do it, you know, massive crises will sometimes shift their whole center of gravity, but that's unlikely, I think. So then I'm been thinking about it, and of course you obviously have been thinking about it, John, because you have a very nice articulation, and actually a very benign one, maybe compared to mine, which is that this is to do with capitalism, and this is I've just written about this, which is that capitalism, American capitalism, is based on two powerful psychological motivations: greed and fear. And because America is, in some sense, the most successful and the most capitalist country in the world, it has powerfully kind of developed greed and fear. And it maintains fear by not providing any social safety net. There is no social safety net. And that is not like just by coincidence. That's on purpose. You need people to be fearful if you're going to drive capitalism really powerfully, because that fear is in every single American, and everyone I've worked with has expressed this fear of homelessness.
Mm.
No matter how much money they have, everybody knows if they got sick, they got out of work, they had massive medical bills, hundreds of thousands of dollars, which you could create those in a matter of weeks. Um, they could be homeless. They could lose their house and they could be homeless. I've written about that. This is both a reasonable fear, but it's very irrational and it's very embedded in the American culture. If you understand that fear, like Trump does, then you can play on it.
Mm.
The Democrats don't play on fear. They play on what I would call aspiration.
Mm.
We need to be a better democracy. We need to be more caring. We need to support people. We shouldn't be racist. These are all aspirational because they actually are not true.
Mm.
America is systemically racist. It's systemically misogynist. And so
Mm.
Harris really, in some sense, didn't have a chance. And it also has this almost, what would you say, kind of like adulation, this sense of devotion to the celebrity,
Mm.
that everybody wants to be famous and everybody wants to be financially successful. Those are the two measures of the American dream. So if you understand those things, you know that you can play on the fears and the desires around those things. And Trump, that's what he did. He played on the fears, which is like, look at what Biden and Harris did. Cost of living has gone up. Your eggs, the price of eggs has gone up. Okay. And this is what Maslow in his hierarchy of needs calls a deficiency need. It's a sense that I'm not safe and my survival is at risk, and therefore
Mm.
I will do anything and I will reach for anything. It's the drowning man syndrome. I'll reach for the straw, and Trump is a straw. Now, Harris is talking about democracy and values and all of this stuff. Those are totally irrelevant to somebody who's frightened. You know, if
Mm.
they're drowning, what do you care about, values? Values are really unimportant and were very unimportant in this election. I think, in some sense, Trump is plugged in at some level to the psychic shadow of America, and he knows that it's racist, so he can play this little racist card. He knows it's a misogynist, so he can play that card, and he knows that people are fearful of being homeless, so he can play
Mm.
that card, or hungry. So, in some sense, he did what people wanted and needed to make them feel a little better, a little bit
Mm.
hopeful. at least there'll be some change. I think this is what a lot of people have said. At least he's doing something different, even if it's bizarre, because the same old is not working. So there's my rant.
That's good. And I think just something you said there. Well, a lot of what you said, I don't think was all that different from mine in the
No,
sense of
no.
you're kind of saying that America has to develop and grow up, and they aren't going to do it by having people in power who are patronizing and talking down. It's not that I'm not pro-Trump at all, but there's no party that is really calling the truth by supporting Israel and not taking a stand with Putin. America demonstrated they aren't going to support the underdog. They're going to support a power structure. And therefore, a lot of people, were outraged about that. And I think
Mhm.
voted against them simply because they were abandoning the underdog in all sorts of ways in their own country too. That even in terms of, the gun laws, people are afraid to take a stand against that and would rather see, children and others be massacred in churches and schools and work through those incidents one at a time rather than seeing that it's symptomatic
Right,
of
right.
a
Yeah. Yeah, the tool
war.
is it's a killing machine to kill
Hmm.
people. Well, why wouldn't you kill people with it if you've got a killing machine to kill people? It's kind of a little obvious, isn't it?
I just want to say one thing first. You're taking over my turn. So just to give a good example to everybody about how we how we help each other
Right, thank you, John.
with our tendencies. And yeah, so there's something you said about it will swing back and forth. I don't think it will this time.
Hmm.
I think that uh, in the growing up process, you'll witness people wanting to grow up without reverting back to the idealists. Also there's a power hierarchy there in terms of, have a lot of history of holding power in all sorts of ways that are one wouldn't say corrupt, but they're about money, the relationship with money, and also world power and the empire. So I think America is going to want to work something through and not just revert back this time. And it'll be interesting to watch the maturation process happen as times get hard and what kind of new talk comes out of the mouth of people as they kind of try to rally together and not lose power but grow up,
Mhm.
move up to another stage of development. And I like the notion that developmentally a lot of things have to happen within a horizontal framework.
So
So
give me an example of that, John.
um, well, I work with parents a lot who are either complaining about their children or they're complaining about each other as parents, or they're kind of anger. There's an anger issue within the family. I try to encourage them to see that their children are internalizing their role models all the time, the way that they react to things,
Hmm.
deal with things.
Hmm.
In order for things to improve, they need to, really learn some skills, learn to develop some skills that help them be fundamentally different in the way they deal with problems, the way they talk to each other as a couple, the way they talk about the world, and that their children will initially, get worse before they get better in terms of behavior because they want to see that the parents can sustain that after being so primitive in a way. They want to see that their parents can stay a bit more sophisticated under pressure. And so if parents can do that, then the kids will, there'll be lots of repetitions, which there need to be, which give them experience of their parents role modeling something that they get to the point where it can be internalized because it's substantial. It's more about it becoming real and able to withstand a regression back to that previous position of might is right or anger is the issue or
Right.
that's how things are going to be dealt with in a reactive kind of way. So when in order for people to grow, there has to be more differentiation, more experiences of that, and more sophistication in the way that they internalize role models that are more spacious, more developed, more tolerant, more resilient. And when they do, then children start to kind of align themselves. And I think even on a brain level, they start to align themselves with that new level of functioning of Trump and others managing the crisis that they're going to face, because there are going to be a lot of crises. It's not going to be all kind of happy fun time. Of the promises are not going to ring true. There will be hardships, and he will have to talk up that there are if we get through this, it will be truly better in new ways. And I'm not pro-Trump, but I think I'm pro-developmental processing by more of the masses being represented in that process. And it's a shame there's not a more kind of middle of the ground party who speak the truth.
I agree with that, definitely. But if you take the analogy that, say, Trump is the father, because obviously there's a huge projection of masculinity, all of these inadequate men voting for him. I shouldn't say, maybe that's too generalized, but, men who are feeling disempowered, feeling empowered through Trump. So you've got there what I would call, in group terms, you get a mad bad leader. If you've ever come across that in a group, a leaderless group, somebody, the worst person takes control. So it's a worry that I have that he's a mad bad leader, and therefore also that he's modeling how not to behave
Mm.
but people can take that as a permission. And you found it already online that there's so much more misogyny, there's all this attack against women and of course racism because people have been given permission. It's not that it hasn't been there all the time, it's just
Mm.
that it's been suppressed.
Mm.
So if you think about, okay, so we'll talk about the Republicans as being more on the masculine, discipline side, and we have to take a firm stance, law and order, and the Democrats more on the feminine side. We have to support people and care for them. Basically, what you've got is two parents who fight all the time. They
Mm.
never cooperate. They
Mm.
never come to agreements about anything at all. So what
Mm.
kind of children do they produce?
Mm. Well, so far, I think it will be like if you think about a lot of the Christian churches and the way they speak, and a lot of the preachiness that goes on, that will change. People will have to go through a process there, a different way of talking. And when you give people power, sometimes there's almost like a archetypal something that gets superimposed upon them
Mhm.
that influences them. And this maybe takes us back to the shadow, that they start to kind of have a different relationship with the shadow because of that new developmental archetype, which can be more inclusive of the shadow as a way of trying to transcend it and include it instead of just, fight it in one way or the other.
So back to that, when I brought up that question about Jung and the shadow, Jung was very clear that the shadow in America, at least some aspects of it, are projected on Black people and on Native Americans. And that's why you're able to enslave them and you are able to massacre them basically with the Native Americans because they carry the shadow and you're trying to get rid of the shadow. But you still see, just with an adolescent, you see that an adolescent can't contain the shadow, can't integrate the shadow. So they project it everywhere. It gets
Mm.
blown out of all over the place. And you see that so clearly with America, with the projection of shadow. You've got internal projection, which is I'm
Mm.
projecting if I'm a Republican on the Democrats, if I'm a Democrat
Mm.
on the Republicans. And I'm
Mm.
actually sometimes kind of shocked by the way in which Democrats don't recognize their own shadow projections on the Republicans, because the Republicans, they're just ordinary people. You might think they're misguided and have weird beliefs, and they're doing the wrong thing. But in general, if you speak to somebody who's very conservative, they're very nice.
That
But
they
you
project.
understand, from a Democrat person, there's this demonizing from each side, where definitely Democrats see Republicans as gun-toting, um, misogynists who are going to kill everybody, and they're frightened. People I talk to are terrified.
Mm,
There's a deep kind of visceral fear amongst
mm,
liberal people of Republicans, which makes it very, very hard for them to even communicate. I've had people say, I found out my boyfriend was a Republican and I just stopped the relationship right there.
mm,
That's it. That's the end of the relationship. There's the projection on to the rest of the world. Although it's a funny thing about America, when you live here, the rest of the world does not exist. There
mm,
is no rest of the world. There is only America. There's
mm,
nothing else beyond the American thing. If you look at
mm,
the news, you'll see very little news about the world. There's
mm,
no world news. There's no kind of internationalism.
mm,
So it's very internal.
mm,
And I'm concerned about this projection because I think that the Democrats have to start the integration process because I'm not sure the Republicans are able to do that yet. You know,
mm,
that they need to start to build bridges, recognize the humanity of the people who have different beliefs, have a little more compassion for the fact that this is fear-based. Yes, this is delusional and maybe actually be very destructive, but it's because people are frightened. If people
mm.
were less frightened, then you wouldn't get such bizarre responses.
Just in relation to the shadow, there's also the golden shadow.
Right. Good one, John. Come in with the positives when I've gone too far over to the negative side.
Well, I think the golden shadow is something that it doesn't necessarily come in like the archetypal kind of new possibilities. It kind of arises up from below, a force of that in some ways people don't understand. Well, you could say it's like a baby being very primitive and archaic. A baby doesn't understand its positive or negative shadow. But the more there's nurturance of the right kind and a resilience in the parent, and also a kind of remarkable, alive vitality field of subjectivity that comes from the mother and the father that is loving, very loving and creative. The child joins that of kind of new possibilities of feeling and of doing and learning. And it allows a different kind of aspiration and also a
Mm,
different kind of sense of belonging. There's so many splits in not just America, you could say in most countries,
yeah, yeah.
so many splits that the whole world has work to do. And they're not going to do it through just more of the same kind of top-down power and the more same kind of politicking. It's got to be some new world order that is like unknown, almost unknown. And the golden shadow is I think resilience and not a it's a responsive, not a reactive force. And it's not a running off at the mouth kind of speaking about itself.
I want to respond to a couple of things. First of all,
Yeah.
you're not allowed to ever say the New World Order because that's going to make you, if you're in America, you're liable to be shot for just even saying that.
Well, I think I yet have to say what I mean by that.
Yeah, I know.
Just really about a new impetus for change, really.
And I think the golden shadow, the gold in the shadow, you know, what I would say it's the compost in the shit, basically, which is if you can actually do your composting, no matter how disgusting that stuff is, it turns into fertility. It's what your soil needs.
Mm.
You've got to have your compost.
Something about doing that, managing it, not just leaving it sit.
Yeah. If it sits, it goes sour and disgusting. And
Yeah.
you have to get the air in it. You have to move it. You'd have to churn your compost. You have to
Relationship.
You also have to cut it into small pieces. People don't realize that. I put it through a tripper shredder, but this is the
Mm,
kind of same thing, thinking of this as an analogy. You
mm,
have to get down to the nitty gritty. You have to get down to the details. If you've got big pieces in your compost, there's not enough connection between the pieces for the
mm,
bacteria to break it down. It's the
mm,
same thing with human beings. If you don't have connections between people, if you don't
mm,
have black and white people actually having relationships, then racism continues on both sides.
mm,
You
mm,
know, it's like you've got to chop it up really fine.
mm,
And I
mm,
think that's a great analogy. And I think the golden shadow, I am fundamentally optimistic, but very skeptical. So I actually do believe that human beings can become better. It's just a very long and tedious and difficult process.
mm,
You know, the rising of consciousness we talked about in the last one is an evolutionary process, and
mm.
those take a long time. And
Yes.
you're wanting that to happen in America. If you think of Trump as a step back into a slightly more primitive way of thinking, we were talking about spiral dynamics, you know, it
Mm.
fits kind of with that way of
Primitive,
thinking.
primitive but inclusive.
Explain that.
Well, that there are more people at that level of struggle and identity and participation in the world. There are more people, so he is catering to, or he's appealing to the masses
Ah,
of the underprivileged in lots of ways, to do with education or to do with even having hope in the other party because they've been so disappointing in so many ways. So there's a new emerging edge to this kind of leader. All of those people have been using Trump in the service of themselves because
great.
they're admitting something about a level of hurt, disappointment, confusion, frustration, but also about something new is needed, something different is needed other than more of the same.
So going back to the golden shadow, this is a mysterious process, the golden
Mm,
shadow, you know, that it arises unexpectedly. It
mm,
does not come from forethought. It's something that happens without us actually being in control over it.
mm,
That makes it very unpredictable and also kind of a little scary for people. We
mm,
don't like things which are out of control. Um,
mm,
but it does arise, and you see it in your clients, don't you? You see a sudden shift
mm,
because what we're wanting is we want those human qualities to arise, which is compassion, which is caring, which is connection, which is thinking in a wise way about what's needed for the world and for other people. But those maybe only will arise in America when things have chopped up and composted a bit. And you could say, oh, well, yes, we know that Trump is a chipper shredder. You know, you feed in the material and it comes out all chopped up.
mm.
But maybe that's good compost.
So there's so much going on there, really.
Yeah,
And
I think it's always our tendency to try and simplify, to try and
mm,
get it conceptualized and break it down into kind of neat little compartments.
mm,
But as we know, human beings are infinitely complex as far as I'm concerned. And then societies, which are mixtures of human beings,
mm,
are so complicated. And it's beyond our little minds to capture all of that.
mm, mm. Phew.
Okay.
Let's let's
I think
continue.